We're on week 10 of the ChefGirl Nutrition live cooking series, and we are continuing on with our seasonal cooking using seasonal ingredients in our dishes. So this recipe, we're highlighting two seasonal ingredients. So we're making a summer greens frittata with a sweet roasted red pepper sauce. So we're using greens, which most greens are in season now. Most like dark leafy greens like collard greens, kale, Swiss chard, spinach, arugula. You can find all of these greens in abundance now. You'll see them at local markets. And then also bell peppers are in season now. So we are gonna highlight a red bell pepper in this roasted red pepper sauce, but we're going to roast the pepper ourselves first. You certainly could, as a shortcut, use jarred roasted roasted peppers. But we'll go through this and you'll see it's very easy to roast a pepper yourself. And it just, then you just get like a fresher pepper flavor than, jarred roasted pepper that's been sitting, in liquid or olive oil, whatever it's packed in for a while, dilutes that pepper flavor a little bit. And especially using a red pepper that's in season now, it's even more full of flavor. We're gonna get a lot more nutrients out of it. So it's just a fun way to use it. That's an alternative to just eating, sliced bell pepper. So that's what we are making today. So we're gonna make the frittata, and the frittata gets served with a nice dollop of the sauce right on top of it. So I was just mentioning before that we made a frittata before when we did our Mother's Day live cook along. And that was like a classic stovetop to oven frittata where we cooked everything in a cast iron pan and then put the whole pan into the oven. For this frittata, we're going to be baking it in a regular baking dish, a 9x13 baking dish. So it's gonna come out more like a frittata casserole kind of situation. Where we'll cut the pieces, they'll be like nice square pieces rather than cutting them like triangles out of a pan. But otherwise, the whole process is generally the same. And something like a frittata is a great way to use your greens, because the problem with greens sometimes is that if we buy too much, they go bad pretty quickly. They start to get wilty after just a couple of days. So we want to really be able to use them up without wasting them. So something like a frittata, like we're using 6 cups of chopped greens in this frittata. So that's using up a lot of greens. So it's just a good way to use them if you're on like day 4 or 5 of them sitting in your fridge and you haven't used them yet and you need to use them before they end up in the trash. This is a great way. So we're gonna keep kind of hopping between the 2 recipes to get everything done in one go. So we're gonna start with the red pepper sauce because we need to roast the pepper. So similarly to the process that we did last week for the tomato salsa, we're gonna broil the pepper to get it nice and charred on the outside. And then we're gonna be able to peel the skin off and have a nice roasted pepper. So if you are cooking along, or just when you make this in the future, you wanna have your oven preheated to broil. And same thing as last week, we want an aluminum foil lined baking sheet. So we don't wanna use parchment paper because the broil is too hot for the parchment paper and it will burn. So we wanna use aluminum foil here. So the red pepper sauce has, of course, 1 whole red bell pepper and then also 1 Roma tomato that's also gonna go into the oven. I just wanted to mention because the recipe says 1 Roma tomato, but obviously they vary in size a little bit. So like I only could find really tiny Roma tomatoes in the store. So I'm gonna roast both of these and then I think I'll probably use like 1.5 of the other one. So if you have a bigger Roma tomato, you only need the 1. So just kind of a note on that. Okay, so with roasting a red pepper, you can just put it right on the tray whole and stick it in the oven. And you'll just rotate it like every 10 minutes for like 30 minutes. So it takes a bit longer if it's whole. So we're gonna cut it in half. So I'll show you how we want to cut this guy. So I'm just going to cut just the very top off. And we're just going to cut him in half. And then we can pull out, I want to get like a garbage bowl, which I don't have out. There's a container here. So we can just pull all of the insides out just like that. So cutting them in half and then broiling them, you know, in this way you get all the seeds and stuff out beforehand, whereas when you broil it whole, you'll have to pull out all the insides once it's cooked, but once it's cooked, the insides really just like fall out. So whichever way, either way will work. And then the tomatoes, we're cutting just like we did for the salsa. We want to cut them lengthwise. And we can cut off the little top there. The thing about roasting the pepper whole is that we don't waste the top piece because the whole pepper goes on the tray. So, but now we can just snack on this guy. Okay. All right, so like I said, I'm using 2 tomatoes just because they were really little, but if you have bigger Roma tomato, you only need 1. Okay, and then this is how we want everything lined on our sheet tray. We want flesh side down, skin side up. So I have my tomatoes and my pepper. So again, just like we did with the tomatoes for the salsa, no olive oil or anything on this. Going into the oven just as is on broil for 10 minutes. Okay. Okay, so I mentioned that last week too when we did the salsa, that we don't want, with the broil, right, it comes from the top of the oven. So we don't want it to be we don't want the tray to be too close to the broiler because then everything will burn on the outside before the inside gets nice and tender. So I just moved the oven rack down a notch just so that it wasn't so close to the top of the broiler. So that's in for 10 minutes. And when those first 10 minutes are up, we're gonna take the tomatoes off, they'll be done. And we will put the peppers back in for another 10 minutes. Okay, so while that is in there, we're gonna get started on the veggies for the frittata. So we're going to use 1 leek, or you could use a half of an onion, like half of a yellow onion or a white onion. 1 clove of garlic, we're gonna saute in olive oil, and then we're adding in it's like 5 to 6 cups, it doesn't have to be exact, of chopped greens. So you can use whatever kind of greens you like here. I have a mix of kale and green chard here. So I just chopped it all up, washed it, rinsed it off in a colander, and it's just ready to go. But you can use whatever you like. So we have a leek here. I wanted just to show you guys again, because I've showed leeks before, but I feel like they're a more unfamiliar vegetable. So the leek comes with the really long green attached to it, so I already chopped that off. And then we want to cut it in half lengthwise so that now you get access to all of these layers and you can clean it. So now we want to rinse it, like you can see. I'm just going to take this layer off, but sometimes they're obviously sometimes much dirtier than others. So we want to just rinse all that off. I'm going to just take this outer piece off. So that's how you cut them in half to clean them. So I'm just going to rinse it. So you just want to, as you're rinsing it, just go, you know, kind of like go through the layers to make sure you get all the dirt off. And just like the tomatoes, my leeks were really tiny also. I don't know what was with the produce today. So I'm using 2 smaller leeks. If you have a bigger leek, you just need 1 leek, or like I said, you can sub the leek for half of a yellow or white onion. Okay, and then we're just going to thinly slice these. Scroll down here. Okay. So we just want to thinly slice them. And they're just gonna get sauteed, so it doesn't have to be anything perfect. And the reason I just like the taste of leeks. I've talked about them before. They're just a little bit more mild than a regular onion, a little bit sweeter. And they're also in season in the spring, so they're kind of, like still lingering now. So, and then you just kind of run your knife through and just give them a little bit of a finer chop. Okay, that's good. All right. Okay, and then with the leeks, we're also going to have 1 clove of garlic. So I like when making a frittata, you don't have to saute any onions or garlic or anything, but it just adds another layer of flavor. Adding any sort of alliums, which is any sort of onion or garlic, right? Those are the things that we always use as the base for flavor if we're making a sauce or a soup or something like that. So just by adding those in, it just adds another depth of flavor, versus just sauteing the greens alone with the olive oil. Okay. Plus, there's also always extra health benefits from adding in things like garlic. Garlic is very anti-inflammatory, so you reap the benefits of flavor and health. Okay, so we want some sort of deep-sided skillet, because when we first put the greens in, it's going to be a big volume because we're using 6 cups. So something that's a tall-sided skillet is great. And so I have it just on a medium heat, and I'm just adding a couple tablespoons of olive oil. Okay. So we're gonna put the leeks in first, let those saute for just like 3 to 5 minutes until they get a little softened. Then we'll add in the garlic, just cook it for like a minute. So I don't like to put the garlic in with the leeks because you really just want the garlic just to cook down a little bit. We don't want it to burn, right? I've talked about this before, that the flavor of burnt garlic will overpower anything. So you just want to avoid burning the garlic. So I like to just toss it in and saute it for just like a minute before we add in the greens. Okay. So leeks are going in. And we're going to add a pinch of salt in with the leeks, and this helps to draw out the moisture from the leeks to help them soften a bit more without them burning. So you just want a nice, it's like a 1/4 teaspoon or so, just a nice pinch of salt in there. And that's what I do when sauteing any onions, just add a pinch of salt in there with them. And that helps them to soften without burning. And it starts, right? I always talk about adding salt at different stages of the recipe so that there's depth of flavor throughout the recipe. So adding a pinch of salt here is just the first step in adding some flavor into the frittata. We have just a minute left on the peppers and tomatoes, so that's going to come out, and we're going to take the tomatoes off and set them aside. and put the pepper back in for another 10 minutes. Also going to peel, we're gonna peel the skin off of the tomatoes for this, because I don't want the skin to get into the sauce, because whereas with the salsa, it's kind of like a chunkier sauce to begin with, so a little texture is okay. But this red pepper sauce is really nice if you blend it through to be nice and smooth. So I'm going to take the skins off the tomatoes so that they don't, like the tomato skins are hard to blend up fully, so you might get like little bits of them in there. So we're just going to take those off. Okay. Whoa. All right. So you can see the pepper is starting to get nice and charred. I'm just gonna like rotate them. And we're gonna take the tomatoes off the tray and we're gonna peel the skin off when they cool down a little bit. Okay. And putting the peppers back in on broil for another 10 minutes. Okay. And now my leeks are nice and softened. I'm going to add the garlic in. Okay, so you can see they get nice and soft without getting burnt. And the leeks cook down quite a bit, so even, just like regular onions. So if, you feel like you have too many leeks, they do cook down. And a clove of minced garlic. Okay, and we're just going to cook that for a minute before we add in the greens. Okay, so I have my greens, like I said, I have kale and green chard here. So I have them mixed together in here because I just washed them all together. But something like, just a thing to keep in mind is that heartier greens are going to take a little bit longer to wilt down than a more delicate green. So something like kale is going to take a little bit longer to cook than the chard. But I'm just going to put them all in together. This is also then going in the oven, so everything gets cooked a little bit more too. But if you're using like kale and spinach, I'm sure you know from cooking with spinach before that spinach cooks down, in like a minute as soon as heat touches it. So it really just needs to go in for like the last minute, whereas the kale, takes a few minutes to really wilt down. So just something to consider in general with greens, even if like you're subbing something out, like if you're subbing kale out for spinach in a different recipe, you might need to adjust the cooking time because the kale is going to take longer to cook than spinach. Just something to think about. Okay, so I'm adding in 6 cups, roughly. And it doesn't have to be perfect. And the thing with greens too, you don't even really need to like chop them too much. You can really just kind of like tear them apart. You just want them in small enough pieces that when we're eating the frittata, we're not getting like a giant piece of kale or something in there. So you can see that the pan is really full when the greens go in, so that's why you want a pan with higher sides, but it'll cook down. So let this cook for a couple of minutes. things like kale always get, you know, like the superfood label, and you feel like you have to eat a bowl of kale every day to like be healthy. But obviously that's not true, right? We don't need to eat anything if we don't like it. I don't like a big bowl of kale. That's not my jam. I like it cooked, you know, so this is a really nice way to get all of those health benefits of kale without having to eat a big bowl of kale salad if you don't like raw kale. So I'm never an advocate for you eating something just because it's deemed super healthy. If you don't like it, don't eat it. Or find a way to cook it that you do enjoy it. Oh, and I'm going to add another pinch of salt and pepper here to season the greens. So another layer of flavor. And then these guys are pretty much done. Okay, so we have the greens all nice and cooked down now, so you can see how much they really cook down, right? So we want to set this aside now, off the heat. You can leave it in the pan, but just set it off the heat, because we want to give this a chance to cool before we are going to add it into our eggs. Okay, pepper's done. Beautiful. All right, so this is what we want. We're gonna reduce the temperature of the oven to 400 now, down from broil, because we want it at 400 to cook the frittata. So this is what we want for the peppers. Remember, we're gonna be removing the skin. So actually the more burnt, the better, right? The more blistered, that means it's gotten nice and broiled. We want that inside of the pepper to also be tender. So what we're gonna do now is take a metal bowl, if you have a metal bowl, any bowl should really work. We're going to put the pepper halves right into the bowl. And we're going to cover the bowl. I'll show you what I'm doing here. We're going to cover the bowl with some plastic wrap. Tightly, so you want it to really, so whatever bowl you're using, you want it to be some kind of bowl that, you know, the saran wrap or whatever plastic wrap will actually like adhere to. So we want it to be nice and tight. Oh God, it's like too tight, I can't move it. Okay, so what this is going to do is it's going to give the peppers a chance to steam, and that's going to make the skins come right off. So it's going to loosen all the skin, and you can see, maybe because the light's in the way, but you can see how now it's just getting steamy in the bowl. So we're going to come back to this. We're going to do the rest of the frittata and get that in the oven, and then we're going to come back to this, and the skins are going to be nice and easy to just peel right off. So we're going to set this aside with the tomatoes. And the tomatoes too, the skin just kind of comes right off. They don't really need to, steam like the pepper. So now we're going to work on the rest of the frittata. All right, so in this frittata, I'm not knocking anything over, we're using a whole dozen eggs because we're filling up that big 9 by 13 baking dish. So we're gonna use a whole dozen eggs, 12 large eggs. So just crack all those into a large mixing bowl. We're gonna season the eggs with salt and pepper. We're gonna add in half a cup of half and half, or you can use any kind of milk. You can use a plant-based milk too, like an almond milk or something. and that just helps to emulsify the eggs a little bit more, and it helps to create a fluffier frittata. So that's why we add the milk. And then with this frittata, because I really just wanted to keep it simple and highlight the greens, we're just using Parmesan cheese. So we're gonna mix half the Parmesan cheese in with the eggs and then put the rest of it on top of the frittata. But you could totally use whatever kind of cheese you want. If you want to do feta cheese, cheddar cheese, goat cheese, any of them will work. Okay. All right, and some salt and pepper. So just a nice pinch of salt and pepper. Remember, we have 12 eggs, so we want a good pinch. But we've also seasoned all of the veggies that are going into the frittata. So that's, like I said, we want to add flavor at each step of the recipe. Okay, and we're just whisking these up. I like to use a fork, but you can use a whisk. Oh, my half and half. See, that's what happens when I don't have it out. Get the half and half. Okay. Half a cup. Right in with our eggs. So we want a full cup of Parmesan cheese. We're adding half of it in. And half of it in with the eggs. Get a full. We need more Parmesan cheese. Okay. And then we're going to add the other half of it right on top. You could also add some fresh herbs in here if you want. Something like basil would be good. Okay. And so we want to just make sure that you grease your 9x13 dish, either with some sort of spray, like I'm just using an olive oil spray. You can use butter or even just regular olive oil. Just over the sink. Okay. And we're going to get our greens. So our greens have now had a chance to cool down a little bit. So now we're going to fold them right into the eggs. Okay. All right, and then we're just pouring it. Make sure you pour it right in. It'll look, it looks kind of low in the pan, but it, poofs up as it cooks. So just spread it out a little. Okay. And we're gonna add I'm just gonna use what's left here of my Parmesan cheese. Add the rest of the Parmesan cheese to the top. So this will actually make like a nice kind of like Parmesan cheese crust almost on the top of this. And you can, like I said, you can do this with any cheese, and I always like to put half of it in the egg mixture and then put the other half on top, no matter what cheese you're using. Okay, so this is going into the oven at 400. So remember, we lowered the temperature of the oven for 20 to 25 minutes. Just like the frittata in the skillet, it will like poof. Well, it might not, but if it does, it might poof in the center, but that will deflate. So we just want to make sure that it's not jiggly in the center. And with this kind of frittata, just like you would like a cake, you can stick a toothpick in the middle and make sure it comes out clean. And that's a good way to know that it's done. Okay, so while that's in the oven, we're going to return to our red pepper sauce. For the red pepper sauce, we're using a high-powered blender. You could use a food processor as well. All right, so let's get our pepper back over here. Also bring the tomatoes here. Okay. So everything is just going right into the blender for the sauce. All our ingredients. So this is kind of like a riff off of a romesco sauce, which is like it comes from Spain. It's a sauce that you know, is based off of roasted red peppers, and it's delicious on a lot of things, and you will likely have leftover from the frittata. So you can use it as a spread on a sandwich or a wrap or something. You can use it as a dip for veggies. Serve it with like any kind of protein. It's delicious with chicken or meat. So there's a lot of ways to use it. So we're just putting in here, I'm gonna put, like I said, I used 2 tomatoes. I'm gonna put 1.5 of the tomatoes in here. Get our pepper. We're putting in 1 to 2 cloves of garlic. So this is a pretty fat clove, so I'm just using the 1 clove. We're using the juice of half of a lemon. Like this. Squeeze it right into the blender. Okay, 1/4 cup of roasted almonds. You could really use any nut here. It doesn't have to be almonds, just like with pesto, you can kind of use whatever nuts you have. But they are, you know, it does give a different kind of flavor if they're roasted. So if you don't have roasted nuts, just toss them in the oven at 325 for like 10 minutes and you got roasted nuts. We're using a tablespoon of red wine vinegar. And we want 1/2 teaspoon of salt and a few grinds of black pepper. And this is, again, something that you will, you know, taste, and you can always adjust the seasoning as you like. Okay. And then we have our pepper. So you can see now the pepper has gotten like even more wrinkly. Okay, and the skin is gonna just come right off. See? Nice and easy. So just peel that skin right off. And we're gonna throw both halves of the pepper into the blender. That's it. So this is a roasted red pepper. See, so nice and softened. You can store these just in, you know, a sealed jar or container, and they'll keep for a few days. If you want them to keep longer, like if you make a big batch of homemade roasted red peppers to have on hand for whatever, they'll keep longer if you store them in olive oil. So you can put them in a sealed jar or container and just cover, pour olive oil so that they're like submerged in olive oil, and that will help to keep them fresh longer. Okay, make sure I got everything in here. And of course we need olive oil. So we're going to use a 1/4 cup of olive oil. Whether you're using a food processor or a blender, we want to drizzle the olive oil in from the top as we blend so that it helps to emulsify it all the way. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start this low. Okay, Vitamix is very feisty. All right, so you can kind of blend this to whatever texture you like. Like I said, it does come out to be quite a smooth sauce if you blend it all the way, which is how I like to have it. So that's why I like to take the tomato skins off as well. But so this is it. So this is nice, and I don't even need to put it through the blender again. So this is the sweet roasted red pepper sauce. So it, of course, the peppers get sweeter by cooking, and then by adding the tomatoes, and we also add a level of sweetness there. So it actually is quite sweet. But like I said, it's a good way to get your red peppers in while they're in season if you're not a big pepper eater. So of course, red bell peppers in particular are like one of the highest sources of vitamin C. We usually just think of citrus as being our main source of vitamin C, but red peppers boast a lot of vitamin C. So that's a really notable health benefit of them, which we know helps with our immune system. And this is actually a fact that I didn't learn too long ago, is all bell peppers, let me just get a bowl to put this in. So all bell peppers actually come from the same, like they're all the same seed. They're all the same plant. So they all start green, and then the longer they ripen, they go from green to yellow to red. So the green is going to be the most bitter flavor, yellow somewhere in the middle, and the red is the sweetest. So the color difference is actually how long it's been sitting out in the sun and ripening. And also because of that, so the red peppers have been sitting out the longest, ripening the longest, so they also end up with the greatest nutrient benefit, with the greatest nutrient value. So the red bell peppers are going to have more vitamin C and other nutrients even compared to green bell peppers or yellow bell peppers or orange bell peppers. So that's actually something that I only learned pretty recently. So I thought that's a fun fact. Okay. So like I said, you can taste the sauce, add more salt and pepper if you feel you need it. The sauce will keep for a few days. so we've completed the 2 recipes. The frittata is just gonna cook for a few more minutes. Of course, you don't need to make your own roasted red peppers. So if you have like a jar of roasted peppers and you're like, you never use them, because I feel like that's one of those weird like condiments that people have in the fridge and it gets shoved to the back, but like they last a long time because they're packaged that way. So if you have roasted red peppers that you need to use up, this is a great way to use them. So this, like we use 1 whole pepper, 2 halves of a pepper. So you could use, like 4 strips of 4 pieces of roasted red pepper that would come in a jar to get the same effect. The beauty of a frittata is that it's great warm right out of the oven, and it's also great at room temperature. So that will also keep for a few days. So that's definitely something that you can make ahead of time and serve at room temperature also. Because we're using a dozen eggs here, I kind of consider the whole frittata to be 6 servings for 6 adult servings for a meal. So that would be 2 eggs per serving, right? And 2 eggs is typically what we eat, as a serving. So I would say that this whole tray makes 6 adult servings. But of course you can cut it smaller if you're serving it to a group. Obviously you could cut them into smaller pieces. Let's see how we're doing. Boy, it smells good. Okay. I think it needs like 2 more minutes. So it'll take anywhere from like 20 to 25 minutes. So that was 20 minutes. A frittata is just a really good way to use up any veggies that you have lying around. So it makes for a good weekend brunch if by Friday or Saturday you have all, you have some produce from the week that you haven't used. Make a frittata. We should be good now. Okay. So here is beauty, full of greens. So it got, you can see from the side that it got nice and browned on the sides. The center is nice and firm. This one didn't puff up. When I made it the last time that I took it out of the oven and the center was like totally poofed up. Oh, here's my toothpick. So we can just stick a toothpick in the middle just like you would cake, just to make sure. Yeah, nice and clean. And of course, as it sits for a couple minutes more, it'll continue to cook through. Here it is. It smells so good. So like I said, I would just cut this into 6 pieces, and then you just serve it with a nice dollop of the red pepper sauce.